Hey, have you ever wondered what's the single most important thing you can do to improve your performance and the performance of the organization for which you work? The answer to that question is debriefing, setting up a systematic way to provide performance feedback for yourself and your coworkers after every significant action or event in your workday. Today, in this issue of the LifeWings Leadership Lab, we're talking about debriefing, and I'm going to offer you 5 tips to implement a system of debriefing in your organization. This is the same system I learned almost 40 years ago when I learned how to fly Navy airplanes. And when I was a Top Gun instructor in the Navy, we really ramped it up. In fact, I tell people that the willingness to debrief at Top Gun is what set Top Gun apart from every other organization. Listen, I don't care what kind of high reliability organization there is in the world, I can guarantee you they're debriefing. Whether it's a Navy fighter pilot, an Air Force fighter pilot, the Blue Angels, the Thunderbirds, the Army Green Berets, the Delta Force, the Navy SEALs, they all debrief. All your elite, high-performing organizations are deeply committed to debriefing. And the reason they are, and the reason it's embedded into their culture is because it pays such dividends. And honestly, the system is pretty simple. I mean, the debriefing system is really not that hard. It only requires 3 questions. And these 3 questions you can ask in your work life and healthcare as well. So if you really want to ramp up your performance and the performance of your organization, implement a debriefing system, right? So here's 5 steps on how to do that. So you're at the end of the workday or the end of the meeting or the end of the shift or the end of your surgical procedure. How do you debrief? You have your team gathered around and you ask an important question. And the first question we ask is, what went well? All right, so what went well? Right, so we like to start on a positive note to set a positive flavor and tone to the debriefing, right? We don't want to go negative right off the bat, so we want to focus on those things that we did well. Now, there's a very important reason for that, because things that are rewarded, actions, behaviors that are rewarded get repeated, right? So if something was significantly done well, we want to talk about that. We want to remark on it and we want to re-emphasize it so that we'll be sure and do it next time in the next meeting, the next project, the next shift, or the next surgical procedure, right? So it's important here when you say, hey, what did we do well, that you insist that your teammates be specific. So don't accept generalities or non-specific, non-objective language. So if somebody says to you, well, hey, I think we communicated very well, as the leader of the debrief, you'd follow up with that and say, hey, give me an example. What do you mean by we communicated well? So dig for a specific. And in response to that, maybe the team member says, well, I think we did a really good job of answering questions and we didn't leave any open-ended communications there. We closed the loop on everything. All right, so that's very specific and something that can be rewarded and something that you can work on doing next time, right? So once you've captured all of the things you've done well, then you move on to those things that you can improve. So the second question is, what can we improve? All right. And again, you want to be very specific here. So if somebody says, well, we need to be more engaged during the timeout, if you're leading the debrief, you'd want more specificity there. And you say, well, give me an example. Try to be a little bit more specific. What are you looking for when you say we need to be more engaged? And so you might hear something like, well, there was some multitasking going on and we weren't actually looking at the person that was leading the debrief, and that's one area that we can improve, all right? So just like you did on the what do we do well, when you get to what can we improve, really strive for specific, objective, observable behavior that can be changed and improved, all right? So once you've captured all the things that you think you could improve, your third question is, how do we make that improvement happen? So the question is, how do we make it happen? All right, and so this is where we're really looking for specific behavior or actions that we're going to take next time. So if someone says, look, we could improve our engagement during the timeout, your follow-up question is, well, how do we make that happen? So you'd be looking for an answer like, well, we have to stop multitasking and turn our head, make eye contact with the person that's leading the timeout, right? So now you have some specific action that can be taken in the next event, right, in the next surgical procedure. Right, so one more tip for you after you've asked the 3 questions. What did we do well? What can we do to improve, and how are we going to make that improvement happen? A really important point, especially if you're the one leading the debrief, is to start with the most junior, right? So go to the most junior person first to ask this first question, right? So if you're leading the debrief, you don't want to start the debrief by saying, hey, I think it went really well and I think we communicated really well. Because as the leader of the team, you've tainted the well now. There may be other members of the team that didn't think you communicated all that well, and by saying that you thought they did communicate well, you've just stilted or put a barrier up to the type of feedback that you're going to get about the team's performance. So if you're leading the debrief, you save your comments to last. You pick out the person on the team that's the most junior or the least experienced, the one that's least likely to speak up and offer some comments about what went well or what could be improved, and point blank ask them, hey Bob, what do you think? What went well today? And so on both what went well and what could be improved, start with the most junior member of the team. Right after the debrief is complete, you're certainly going to want to recap. So sometimes when you talk about how can we make that happen, you're going to have some very specific actions that the team needs to take. And you want to introduce some accountability there. So the question you ask is, who's going to do what by when? All right. So if there's a very specific action that needs to be taken for the team, you're going to assign somebody to do it, assign the very specific action, and assign a due date. So your recap of the debrief is who does what by when. All right. So very, very important to have that. Who does what by when. And that's your recap. All right. So if you're debriefing in a room or a location where there's a whiteboard, the easiest way to do this is to go to the whiteboard and just draw a T list, right? And on the one side you put a W, that represents what we do well. On the other side you draw an I, and that represents what can we improve. You list the things that were done well. You list the things where there's some improvement. You have a discussion about how you're going to make that improvement happen. Once both sides are complete, then your recap is, if necessary and if needed, who's going to do what by when. All right, so here's your action step. You're not going to do this perfectly, but give it a whirl. I think you'll find it's really quite easy to do. So your action step is, after your next meeting or your next shift or your next project, or even after your next surgical procedure, try these 3 questions. You have the team there. Say you're in a surgical procedure and you're closing the wound, and while you're closing, you say, hey, what do you guys think? What did we do well during this procedure? And to get the conversation going, pick someone on the surgical team to start the conversation out. So, hey, Betsy, what do you think went well today? Right? And then you follow up with what could we improve? How can we make that improvement happen? Right? It's not going to be perfect. It's a learned skill. Take massive imperfect action and go ahead and embed this as a habit, right? So every time you have the opportunity to review performance as a team, do a formal debriefing process like this. What did we do well? What would we like to improve? How are we going to make that happen? If you want to go deeper, I'm going to list a bunch of links to peer-reviewed papers about debriefing in a healthcare setting. I think you're going to be pretty amazed at the benefits that accrue in terms of outcomes for your patients, and efficiency and workflow for the physician and the staff, and outcomes for the hospital or the healthcare organization. Debriefing is very, very powerful. So be sure and check those links out. Hey, listen, go and be the leader that you'd like to follow. And All the great leaders I know, they really seek after feedback, and debriefing is deeply embedded in the culture of the organizations they lead. And as always, we wish you the very best.